What's going on YouTube? It's your boy Dr. Dub here with a different video than normal. I typically make gaming videos of like Madden, Call of Duty, all that stuff, but I'm also a huge college basketball fan, and so what I wanted to do was make a bracket prediction for this year's tournament. What I did was compile an absolutely massive data set of all the teams in this year's tournament, along with the champions from 2023 through 2010, and major Cinderellas from all the way back in 2006 with George Mason up to last year with Florida Atlantic, to try to find not only the champion, but which teams could be Cinderellas in this year's tournament. And then also, I wanted to predict, quite literally, every single game in this tournament. And there are a lot of variables that went into this. I didn't run any type of major statistical tests, but I did bring all these stats together to measure them. And I'll kind of go over all of them very quickly. So offensive and defensive efficiency, that comes from Ken Palm's rankings, where you can just find by looking up Ken Palm rankings. That is for, whenever you see offensive and defensive efficiency, that's always from Ken Palm. Same with pace of play and strength of schedule. I find Ken Palm's rankings to be the most consistent and thorough out of every single major statistical, not only predictor, but analysis of teams throughout the season. Better than things like the net rankings, which clearly weren't used by the committee, who I honestly think did a pretty bad job with the selection of this year's tournaments, along with the seeding of particular teams, but I'll get into that later. Other categories that I created myself are the success variable. Put simply, that is success measured in NCAA tournaments since 2014. Why am I doing this? I'm not doing it for every team. You can see there are a lot of empty spaces for teams. I only did this for teams that I consider to be national championship contenders. That is the same with success, whether or not they have a top 25 coach, and whether or not they're a top 25 current program in college basketball. Along with whether or not they have top tier guards, their three-point shooting percentage, because typically national champions, at least in the modern era, I guess now could be like 2010 and on, like I measured with Duke. They usually shoot 36% from three or better. That constitutes a national champion. It doesn't always mean that you're the national champion if you shoot that high percentage, but it means that you need to be barely below 36% as a team if you want to do that. And then the outlook is just the sum of all those numbers put together, but it doesn't really matter for the overall scope, just the national champion contenders. And once I compiled this data, I posted it on Reddit. You can see this is the top 50 of Ken Palm from a couple weeks ago. Some of these teams aren't in the tournament, like Maryland, Utah, Indiana State, Pittsburgh. That doesn't matter. What only matters here is this sphere of contenders that I have. It's the circled area of those teams barely above or very below 0 as a total score in the outlook variable, which is right here. Basically, if you're in that sphere of contenders, that means you're a national champion contender. If you're not in it, you're not going to win the national championship, simply put. But there's also another caveat that comes with conference championship season. No team has ever lost the first game of their conference tournament and won the national championship. So in this sphere of contenders, that would knock out teams like Tennessee, Duke, Creighton. That's about it. You might be surprised to see Michigan State in there. I was too, to be honest, but statistically speaking, they seem to be a contender. But obviously, stats never tell the whole story. So my predictions will be based on stats and just my simple opinion on what I think the matchups will look like, because I have a pretty deep understanding of college basketball, but stats help to tell the full story. They are not the full story, though. So if you are making a bracket, I highly recommend that your champion come within one of these teams that is not Creighton, Duke, or Tennessee. Simple as that. Then, with the Cinderellas, what I wanted to do, actually I'm going to skip the champions for now, we're going to move to Cinderellas. Because there's always Cinderellas in March. But they come in different shapes and sizes. And what you can see by that is with teams like Oral Roberts and Florida Gulf Coast and St. Peter's, who are god-awful in a particular side of the ball, but they somehow make a run. They can make up for it in different ways, whether that be good three-point shooting percentage like you see with Oral Roberts. Even though they have a terrible defense, they're good on offense, and they shoot the three well. And they play fast. So if you shoot well and you play fast, generally that means you're going to be scoring at a pretty efficient and high rate. Florida Gulf Coast kind of is just an anomaly, if we're being honest. They're not good at anything. They don't shoot the three well, or they didn't. They're awful from with free throws. But their pace, that's what made them Dunk City. Their athleticism, you get the picture. That's where stats don't always tell the whole story. But with Cinderellas, from my understanding, at least what I've gathered here, it seems like Cinderellas can be somewhat easy to predict. It's like you can't just pull a team out of your ass and say, oh, I like how this team plays. I think they'll make a run in the tournament. It's not that simple. So there are plenty of teams that have had not so great statistical numbers, like St. Peter's and Florida Gulf Coast and Oral Roberts, that have made runs, but not Final Four runs like a Butler, for example, 2 years back-to-back. Look at those efficiency numbers. That's like borderline national champion numbers you'll see. Same with Davidson in 2008. Obviously, that 9th ranking in offensive efficiency and 36% from three is literally off the back of Steph Curry, but still, in a vacuum, you have to be good or elite at something to make a run in March. You can win a one-off game off some bullshit like Furman did last year, but you're going to get blasted in the immediate round after that when you play a true team, like they did against San Diego State. They got blown off the court. So there has to be some method to finding Cinderella teams. So, based on similarities with this, because I have averages of offensive and defensive efficiency numbers, three-point percentages, all that stuff. There are the lowest you can be, which is 231, which is a statistical anomaly. And there's minimums, which is 9, which relative to the rest of these numbers is also a statistical anomaly. But you get the picture. Teams that I think that could make a run in this year's tournament would be Michigan State, even though I honestly think they were overseeded by the committee and probably shouldn't have even been in the tournament. Them being in it, it is what it is. Tom Izzo is a great coach in the NCAA tournament. Their numbers are, for a bubble team, extremely good. They're not a great offensive team, but they're good. They're elite on defense. They shoot the three really well, but they're awful from the free throw line. This stat is pace of play, like was up here. So they play a pretty slow pace, but they've been through the ringer scheduling-wise. So, when it comes down to it, they're playing tough teams, and they're not beating them often, but they're beating them enough to make them a tournament team. But that 19-14 record is disgusting. I don't think Michigan State should have been in, but oh well. Nebraska is a really fun team. I feel like even though their offense is worse than their defense, that they're a better offensive team. Like Fred Hoiberg is a very good offensive coach. They shoot well from three. They play pretty quick. Honestly, they're a good free throw shooting team. I just like them. By the way, these numbers right here and this category, just don't pay attention to it because these teams are not national championship contenders. These are just teams that can make like a second weekend run or possibly even a Final Four run. But, yeah. Enough with Nebraska. Nevada, very underseeded team at 10. I think it's criminal what the committee did to the Mountain West Conference. It's just baffling that Nevada is a 10 seed. But they have some pretty good offensive numbers. They shoot the hell out of the ball, good from the free throw line. They play slow, but they're efficient. So that's a recipe for success. Drake, very similar to Nevada. Grand Canyon, balanced across the board, but a little bit worse at shooting than the rest. Oregon is riding pretty high off the Pac-12 championship run. And the thing is with Dana Altman, his teams seem to always play better when they're lower seeds in March, kind of like Michigan State, but to a lesser extent. Typically, when Dana Altman rolls out a team that's a 8 or 7 through a 12 seed, generally they're going to win a game or two in March. That's been backed up. In 2019, when they were 7 seed, made the Sweet 16. 2013, they were 12 seed, made the Sweet 16. Obviously, they made the Final Four in 2017 as a 3 seed, but they were kind of supposed to do that. You get the picture, though. when they're a lower seed, they can compete. James Madison, been very good all year. I don't like their defense, to be honest with you, but they shoot the hell out of the ball, and they play a pretty fast pace. So that's kind of a recipe for success, at least to win a game or two. I don't think being an extremely fast-paced team will make you a champion. And what I can show you is average pace of play of the past 13 national champions is 180.75. The fastest pace of play was North Carolina in 2017. Out of all these, that's almost an anomaly. Kansas played pretty fast back in 2022, but for the most part, if you're a middling team in terms of tempo, that's better for you. And strength of schedule, obviously, it has to be very high on the list. The lowest is 54, and that's Baylor in 2021, and that could possibly even be attributed to COVID in the shortened season. They only played 30 games total, including 6 in the NCAA tournament. So that could be, making things a little bit off, because after 54, the lowest strength of schedule is all the way down at 26 with Kentucky back in 2012. So bit odd there, but obviously it's not always going to be the same every year. But yeah, Cinderella teams, there are several of them. I don't think that the lower seeds are as good as they are or as they have been in the past. It's weird. The bubble is generally weak, while the mid-majors are typically strong. The mid-majors, I don't think, are as strong as the bubble is this year. There were a lot of teams that usually would be tournament teams that were left out. So I think those mid-majors are kind of just, they're good. There's high likelihood that at least one of them will make it to the Sweet 16. We just don't know which one. But anyways, national championship teams, they have to be extremely solid in both offensive and defensive efficiency. As you can see, the lowest offensive efficiency number to ever win a championship is 2014 UConn, which honestly was a fluke championship run. They were dog shit that season. But somehow, Shabazz Napier and Ryan Boatwright and James Daniels, all of them pulled a championship right out of their ass. In terms of defense, 22 is the lowest, 2021 Baylor, but their offense was so electric that they just made up for it. So stuff like that really does matter in terms of offensive and defensive efficiency. Ken Palm's rankings have been notorious for, holding up over time. In terms of his rankings, if you're higher on the list, you're more likely to win a championship. 3-point percentage, like I said, 36% is the money maker. The average 3-point percentage of champions since 2010 is 37.3. It's extremely high on average. The max is 41.3 with Baylor back in 2021, which is how they made up for a lack of defense. The lowest was Louisville back in 2013. Shout out the Cardinals. I'm a U of L fan, even though we suck balls, but we're going to be back. Don't worry. But the thing is with U of L is that even though they had pretty mediocre shooting percentage, they were the best defense by far in the country, and that really carried them to their national championship. So there's a give and take in how you evaluate champions and just teams in March in general, but there are some rules of thumb to go off of when you're picking a national champion. And I'll definitely take that into account as I go through the bracket making process. So down here, I have every single matchup for the entire tournament. I'm not going to spoil by scrolling down and showing you who makes it to what round. So I'm just going to do a quick rundown of each game and who I think will win. I'm not going to bore you with a bunch of details, just trying to make it quick and easy to digest. So we'll start with the first game in the bracket being, FAU and Northwestern, because UConn, I'll tell you this right now, there are not going to be any 16 seeds upsetting a 1. The 16 seeds this year are just too bad. And generally you're like, 16 seeds always suck. But sometimes, twice in the past 6 years, the 16's upset a 1. I just don't think any of these 4 1 seeds are liable to be upset by a 16 this year. If I'm wrong, sue me. But I'm automatically advancing the 1s. So we'll start with the 8 versus 9 matchup, which is FAU and Northwestern. And I think it's an incredible game, or at least on paper. I think based on the numbers here, FAU has the edge in offense, but the defense for both teams are pretty bad. I FAU shoots or plays a faster pace, but they also shoot way worse from three than Northwestern, who shoots at a freaking 39% rate. It's actually incredible. The guard play is pretty good between both teams. You have studs with John L. Davis and Boo Buie. I think it's a really good matchup, to be honest with you. But the thing is, FAU has Final Four experience, and outside of Boo Buie, Northwestern does not have a lot of offensive talent like they did last year with Chase Audige. They could really use him again this year. For that reason, I'm going to take FAU, even though I don't think they're that good. I just think it's a matchup that kind of favors their play style, which is what March is all about, is matchups. So moving on next to San Diego State and UAB, who is a bid stealer. This is a very interesting matchup. Both teams are basically deadlocked. They're 58-59, respectively, in offensive efficiency. But the thing is, San Diego State is miles better than UAB in defensive efficiency. Both teams suck from three, relatively speaking, and they play a pretty slow-paced game of basketball. Or actually, both play somewhat slow-paced, but UAB is, somewhat fast-paced at 153rd. That's not, a breakneck pace, but they're not like St. Mary's. But the thing is, San Diego State has tournament experience like FAU. They have better guards. They have better coaching. I just think San Diego State wins this one. I'm not saying it's going to be an absolute blowout, but I think San Diego State wins pretty handedly. Next up, we have Auburn and Yale, which is an interesting matchup. But the thing is, Yale, they needed a buzzer beater to beat a god-awful Brown team in the Ivy League Championship, and Auburn is just coming off an absolute shellacking of Florida. And Auburn, their numbers are just gross. I mean, 14th in the country in offense, 6th in defense. They shoot the hell out of the ball at 35%. Not the hell out of the ball, but they shoot it well. They play very fast, and they have a strong strength of schedule. Yale plays very slow. They're not a great three-point shooting team, and they're pretty mediocre in both offense and defense. Pretty cut and dry. I'm taking Auburn in this one. Don't worry, it's not all going to be favorites winning these games. So next up we have BYU and Duquesne. And this is a really interesting game because Duquesne, while they're an undeserving 11 seed relative to teams that will go over like James Madison and Vermont, they have a very good defense. And that'll keep them in this game. BYU quite literally lives and dies by the three. If they're not shooting well, they're going to get the shit kicked out of them. And because Duquesne has such a good defense, I honestly like them to win this game. I feel like BYU is going to come in off a cold game, and Duquesne, they're fighting for their lives in the A10 championship, are going to pull this out of their ass. So I'm going to take Duquesne in the first major upset of the 2024 tournament. Next up is Illinois and Morehead State. The statistical numbers are pretty, I wouldn't say pretty lopsided, but fairly lopsided. Illinois has one of the best offenses in the country. Morehead State has a pretty bad offense and pretty bad defense, but Illinois is not much better on defense. They're relatively deadlocked in three-point shooting. But the thing is, like I said, this stat up here is free throw percentage. Let me get back down to Illinois. So Illinois is 96 in the free throw percentage, much better than Morehead State. They also play at a much faster pace. Literally, the only way Illinois can lose this game is if Morehead State dictates the pace and shoots much better from three than they do. But the thing is, I think Terrence Shannon is one of the best players in the country, rape allegations or not. And that's what you need to win games in March, is elite guard play or just elite players in general to carry you to a victory. So I'm going to take Illinois in that one. Drake and Washington State is a super interesting game because both teams are pretty solid in both statistical categories. Both shoot the ball pretty well. Drake's a bit better, especially from the free throw line. Washington State is actually god-awful from three. But Washington State also plays a pretty slow pace, relatively speaking. So Drake is going to have to rely on Tucker DeVries, who is one of the best players in the country. Their guard play is pretty solid. They shoot the ball well collectively, but DeVries is their bread and butter. If he shows up, they will win this game. If he does not, they will lose. More often than not, though, DeVries shows up. So I'm taking Drake. Iowa State and South Dakota, pretty cut and dry. Iowa State is smoking hot right now. Their defense is on fire, and they shoot the ball pretty well. They don't play super fast, but they're efficient enough. And their defense makes up for it. They're just like a boa constrictor. That's what you think of them like. And for that reason, Iowa State's going to win. Now, we can move on to one of the best matchups of the first round, in my opinion, which is Nebraska and Texas A&M. I think that Nebraska is just, I don't want to say better, but like better suited to win this game. So both play a pretty fast pace, relatively speaking. I know you see 269th right here in pace of play for Texas A&M, but that is a number that I feel like is a bit misleading, especially with the guards like Tyrese Radford and Wade Taylor for Texas A&M. They're going to try to dictate the pace of this game, which is going to be semi-fast breaks and then blitz rate half-court play. But the thing is, Nebraska has the shooting to outpace A&M. A&M will win this game if their three-point shooting shows up, but they're fucking terrible from three. They're 28% as a team, and 235th in the country in free throws. Nebraska is just a much better offensive team, which is going to serve them in this game, and I just think that they're going to win. It's going to be a close game, but I just like the matchup better for Nebraska. So next up on the docket is Wisconsin versus James Madison, a very popular 5-12 upset pick. And I can see why. I think that it's going to be a pretty good game. James Madison is pretty elite offensively in terms of mid-majors, and they like to go up and down and shoot a fuck ton of threes. Wisconsin is a bit more deliberate in how they play, but they like to be efficient on offense, which they are. 16th in the country, as you can see. They're also pretty good from the free throw line, 49th in the country. That record is pretty bad. But they started hot, then in the middle of the season they just absolutely fell off a cliff, and then they stabilized themselves. They won 3 out of 4 games in the Big Ten tournament, almost beating Illinois in the Big Ten championship. The thing is, though, with James Madison, they don't have a Terrence Shannon to bail them out like Illinois did yesterday. Picking Wisconsin. Duke and Vermont, another popular upset pick because Vermont, under their coach John Becker, has been pretty much the epitome of mid-major consistency. They don't win a ton of games in March, but they make it to the NCAA tournament. But the thing is, Duke's numbers, statistically, are so good. Like, I don't think they're that good, but their numbers are incredible. Honestly, 8th in offense, 21st in defense, 38% from 3. The only bad stat offensively is free throw shooting, which is 175th, but Vermont is barely better than them. And that offense for Vermont sucks. They can't shoot. Duke plays well enough on defense to just not run them out of the building because the pace of play won't let that happen. But Duke is going to win this game, and you're going to have a rematch of the 2015 championship. Next up is Texas Tech and NC State. Just a really cool matchup, and it's one of the hardest first-round games to pick. I think that Tech is pretty efficient offensively, but I don't know if they'll have an answer for DJ Burns, who is the lovable fat guy for NC State, who has such a good touch around the rim. I remember when Louisville played them, a friend and I went to the game, and we were just so amazed at how large of a guy he is, but how much finesse he has to his game. He can hit from mid. He can hit turnaround fadeaways, hook shots, reverse layups, you name it. I don't know if Texas Tech has an answer for that. The question is, does NC State still have enough magic to win another game after winning 5 games in 5 days in the ACC tournament? Just an unprecedented run. I think they do. One more game, they got it in them, I would say. Next up is Kentucky and Oakland. I'm going to be pretty brutally honest here. UK is struggling to their standards, but they're extremely talented. Oakland is not good. They're just not. They have 23 wins, but trust me, Kentucky is going to beat the fucking brakes off this team. It's not going to be close. Might be the biggest blowout in the first round. So we move on to another unprecedented thing in this tournament is a 10-10 play-in game. Usually it's 11 seeds. 2 games of 11 seeds that have play-in games. But this time, because the bubble is so strong, it's 10 seeds. But the thing is, Boise State and Colorado are both criminally underseeded, in my opinion. I think it's going to be a really good play-in game. I think it's a true toss-up, to be honest. But I think that Colorado's 3-point percentage and free throw percentage are going to carry them to a win. They shoot 39% from 3, and they're 17th in the country in free throws. Boise State has good numbers as well, but Colorado is just a better team. Boise State could win. Like I said, it's a toss-up, but I lean Colorado, even after the Pac-12 championship loss to Oregon. This is a good game. But when Colorado plays Florida, it's also going to be a high-flying game, but Florida is just better at it than Colorado is. Being honest, they play much faster, they shoot well enough, and their offensive efficiency is just too good. If Mark Clayton shows up, Florida's going to win easy. It's kind of how it comes down to, not easy, but comfortably. Kind of like a 85-78 kind of game. Think of it that way. But Colorado could be a trendy upset pick. Don't sleep on the Buffs. But sleep on them in football because, good God, were they terrible last year. Anyways, moving on to Marquette and Western Kentucky. Western Kentucky's a cool story. They finally got Slick Rick Stansbury out of town, and what do you know? The first year they have a new head coach, they make the NCAA tournament. Wow, what a shocker. But the thing is, Marquette is just really good. Outside of when they played UConn, they were a dominant team this year, and even without Tyler Kolek, if he doesn't play, in my opinion, if I was Shaka Smart, I'd probably rest him or put him in the game if it's an emergency situation. But I think Marquette wins this one pretty handily. They're well prepared all the time. They play very good offensively, and they're a strong defensive team. I just don't think it bodes well for WKU. So moving on to the West region, we have Mississippi State and Michigan State. And this Michigan State team is just the classic Tom Izzo team where they're just basically just a walking corpse into the tournament. And then sometimes they just pull games out of their ass and make a tournament run. I don't know if that's going to happen this year. Like I said, Michigan State is on my Cinderella radar, but I think they're a bit too inconsistent. But the thing is, their talent and their experience in March and Izzo's ability to coach is just too much for Mississippi State. This should be kind of a rock fight. Both teams are really good on defense, and they don't play super fast in general. And they both are god-awful from the free throw line. I mean, that's pathetic on both ends, to be honest. They don't shoot very well from 3. Michigan State shoots well enough. But yeah, it's going to be a rock fight. But I like Michigan State in this one, even though I don't think they were deserving enough to be in the tournament. Anyways, moving on to St. Mary's and Grand Canyon. Another trendy upset pick. And that's even with the West Coast Championship over Gonzaga that St. Mary's had. Grand Canyon, the thing is, they're not going to mind a slow-paced game. They don't play super fast, but they also don't play super slow. But St. Mary's is one of the slowest teams in college basketball. That's probably going to play in their favor because they're 43rd in efficiency, even though they're so slow. If you play slow, but you run good offense, which Randy Bennett has always done, you tend to win games. And even though Grand Canyon is a pretty good story, I just like St. Mary's in this one. I think that they're too poised, they're too strong as a unit, and they win this game. Especially after they just kind of handled Gonzaga, who is a bit similar to Grand Canyon in play styles, even though Gonzaga's a bit better. But, St. Mary's and Gonzaga are used to each other, so it's not an apples-to-apples comparison. I just like St. Mary's in this matchup. So next up we have Alabama and Charleston. This is a really interesting game. So Alabama is number 1 in the country in offense, but they have they couldn't stop anybody. Any offense that has a pulse will score 80-plus points on Bama. It's just pathetic how bad their offense is. I'm honestly surprised it's not below 100. And Charleston's is. This game is going to be high-flying, a very fast pace. Alabama's 9th in pace. Charleston's 59th. It's going to be up and down the floor. I think it might be the highest scoring first-round game. It's probably going to be first to 80 is going to win this game. And based on recent play, I just don't like Alabama to win this one, to be honest. Charleston under Pat Kelsey, they're well coached, they're efficient, they play well together. They almost won in an upset last year in the NCAA tournament. I think they do get their upset this year. So next up we have Clemson and New Mexico. Very interesting game because New Mexico is criminally underseeded, in my opinion, and based on their seeding, they wouldn't have made it to the tournament if they didn't win the Mountain West Championship, which is a damn shame, but at least they did win it. Because look at their numbers. 35th in offense, 40th in defense. Their three-point shooting is not good. Neither is their free throw shooting, but their pace of play is very high, and they have a relatively strong strength of schedule, at least in terms of the Mountain West and it being mid-major, I guess you can call that. Non-Power 6 is what I prefer for at least the Mountain West. Clemson is a bit interesting. They're good on offense and defense. They shoot pretty well. They're very, very good from the free throw line at 8th in the country. They play slow. P.J. Hall is very good. My God, Joe Girard is his name. Just an absolute demon of a guard. And I think that bodes well in the NCAA tournament. Brad Brownell has been on the hot seat for God knows how long. But I think they win this game. New Mexico's a good story with Richard Pitino. And they have some really good players, like Eddie House's son, who is just a freaking dog, even though he sounds like Kermit the Frog, rhyming accidentally. But you get the gist. Clemson, they have the guards to match up with New Mexico, and P.J. Hall is just one of the better post players in the country. That gives them the edge. So, Clemson over New Mexico, simple enough. Next, we have Baylor and toothpaste, one of my least favorite toothpaste brands in Colgate. Colgate is not very good. And I think Baylor is insanely overrated. I honestly think they suck this season. They're fifth in offense, which makes sense. Ray J. Dennis is a very good guard. They have some good shooting. They shoot 39% from three, so they shoot the fuck out of the thing. I just don't think they're very good. And whenever they play good competition, they typically fold. They're first in strength of schedule, but they have 10 losses. 7 of those being in Big 12 play, which is a tough conference, but, I don't know about them. Whenever they played really tough competition, they just didn't win. They really didn't. But Colgate sucks so bad, I'm just taking Baylor. Sorry, I don't know. It's a weird game. I don't like it that much. But what I do like is Dayton versus Nevada. Going to be a really, really good game. Honestly, I think the seeds of the teams should be flipped. Nevada got just screwed by the committee, but whatever. Dayton plays a lot slower, but they're also much more efficient than Nevada is. 21st in offense, 40% from three. Even though Nevada shoots 36.5% from three, which is very respectable, that 40% is ungodly. They're 337th in pace. They shoot 40% from three and are 21st in offensive efficiency. That is just unreal. Unreal. Dayton. It's all that needs to be said. Arizona and Long Beach State. Honestly, Dan Monson, Long Beach State's coach, has the opportunity to do the funniest thing ever. He goes from a dead man walking who is fired on last Monday to making the NCAA tournament. And if he beats this team after falling ass backwards into the tournament and being the second straight 15-2 upset over Arizona, that would just be literally the funniest thing ever. Better than FTU beating Purdue, in my opinion. But the thing is, I think Caleb Love rights the ship. Diallo plays well. Kylan Boswell plays well. You get the picture. Arizona's a good team. They're not a great team, but they're good enough to beat a 15 seed at least. Anyways, moving on to the other side of the bracket in the Midwest region, because Purdue automatically moves on. Jokes aside, they do beat the 16 seed. We have Utah State and TCU, another very interesting game. I think it's a true 8-9 matchup where I think it could go either way. I think Utah State's a pretty good story with Danny, is it like Sprinkle is his name? He's a first-year head coach, doing an amazing job at Utah State after Barry Odom left for VCU. But I just think they're too inefficient, and that three-point percentage is just ugly. It's really bad. So is their free throw percentage. It's just 223rd in the country. God awful. They suck. TCU under Jamie Dixon is typically good for at least one win in the tournament. So, I'll take them. It's not a very analytical decision and thought process, but, sometimes that's just how it goes in tournament games. Sometimes having little logic is better than thinking too much about a game. But with that being said, I'm turning back around and I'm thinking too much about this Gonzaga McNeese State game, which is a trendy upset pick for good reason. McNeese is a very, very good team. They've already won 30 games, even though that strength of schedule is dog shit over here at 336. But their shooting is very good. They're pretty solid on offense, good enough on defense. Gonzaga, while they've been hot, in their last 10 games, I still just don't think they have the horses. Ryan Nembhard is a good point guard, but he's kind of limited offensively. Nolan Hickman, he sucks, I'm sorry. Watson is a decent big, but he is far from Drew Timme. Gonzaga, you made the tournament again. Congratulations, you were overseeded. McNeese State, come on down. Next up, Kansas and Samford. Kansas is quite literally limping into this game. I think that they're broken mentally and physically. They have no bench scoring, and they get blasted by pretty much any good team they play, except for Houston when they just had an out-of-body experience from three. I think that Samford just gets the upset on account of being a really good shooting team at 39% from three, while also having a fast pace of play at 14 in the country. Kansas plays relatively fast, but they're going to get tired. Especially if Hunter Dickinson is out, they don't have the horses. They're going to get tired quick. They're going to get, outshot, honestly. Next up, South Carolina and Oregon, a very interesting matchup in my opinion. I think both these teams are just pretty bad, offensively speaking. 52 and 50th. It's not great. It's not awful, but it's not good enough. Look at those 3-point percentages. So it just makes me want to puke, honestly. Same with free throws. And they don't even play fast. They're slow. And they're still inefficient. So, not great teams. Oregon is riding the high of the Pac-12 championship. And I think that carries on. South Carolina's a decent team. Lamont Paris is a good story. They've had some good wins, but I just think they're too limited. They're good on defense. Don't get me wrong. But it's not enough. I got Oregon. Next up is Creighton and Akron. Honestly, I feel sorry for Akron. They draw a hungry Creighton team that lost in the first round of the Big East tournament, and they lost a 1-point heartbreaker in the Elite Eight last year to San Diego State. I just think that Creighton has really good shooting and talent, and they're just going to beat the shit out of Akron. Simple as that. So, the last matchup, or second to last matchup of the first round, it starts the play-in game. We have Virginia and Colorado State. Gonna be frank, Virginia is a bad team. They play well on defense. They're 7th in the country in defensive efficiency, but they're awful on offense, and they're just putrid at free throws. If they make free throws, NC State's not in the tournament, and a better team is in the tournament. I wish UVA was left out, but Colorado State, yeah, they're a good team. They shouldn't even have been in play-in team. The Mountain West got hosed, so I can't pick them yet. But Colorado State, they win. Then they play Texas, who I also think is bad, even with their good efficiency numbers. I just think they suck. Rodney Terry's not a great coach, but they have leaned on Tyrese Hunter and Max Absmith to carry them all year. And for a game, it'll work. Tyrese Hunter is a hero in the 2022 tournament for Iowa State. Max Absmith in 2021 was a tournament hero for Oral Roberts. Both of them together wins you a game, for sure. St. Peter's in Tennessee is the same St. Peter's from 2022. As much as I wish they could upset another 2 seed from the SEC, ain't gonna happen. I'm not even gonna bother going over the stats. You can see them right here. It's just a mismatch in every sense of the word. So now we move on to the round of 32. UConn and FAU is a cool matchup. I think FAU, like I said earlier, is a solid team. They're pretty good on offense. They're awful on defense. But UConn is just a much, much, much better version of FAU, stylistically speaking, and personnel-wise, and coaching-wise. UConn, not even a question. Next up is Auburn and San Diego State. Really interesting game. I think it's going to be somewhat close just because of San Diego State's ability to play defense. As you can see, they're 8th in the country. But the thing is, Auburn is 6th in the country. And they're much better on offense. They shoot way, 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 way better from 3 and the free throw line. And they play faster and are more efficient. It's going to be a little bit lower scoring than you think just because of how good the defenses are, but Auburn wins for sure. Next up is Illinois and Duquesne. Similar to Alabama, Illinois can't stop shit. And Duquesne can. Illinois relies way too much on Terrence Shannon. Coleman Hawkins is a good player. Brad Underwood's a good coach. But Duquesne is going to do whatever they can, and I mean it, whatever they can, to make anybody but Terrence Shannon beat them. I don't think they can. Duquesne wins, kind of by default in that case. Next up is Drake and Iowa State. I really want to pick Drake in this game because I like them a lot. I like Tucker DeVries a lot, but they just don't have the talent to compete with Iowa State. Their defense is too good, and that's Drake's strong suit, is offense. So it's a bad matchup for them, if we're being honest. It might be a close game. I think it'll end up somewhere within 10 points, but Iowa State's really hot right now. They're shooting better than their percentages are, and that's with their defense being absolutely stifling teams. I think Iowa State wins this one. Next up, we have Houston and Nebraska. Very interesting game. I kind of see it as a mirror image of Drake and Iowa State, but the thing is, Houston might not even give up 60 points in this one. I think they win in a blowout. Tominaga is a really good story for Nebraska. Fred Hoiberg finally winning some games for Nebraska is a great story. They've had an awesome year, but they can't compete with Houston. So next up is the rematch of the 2014 National Championship game. I think that this should be a pretty solid game. Both teams play slow, but are efficient, and they're built similarly in terms of roster. I think it's going to come down to who wins the battle of the backcourt rather than the front court. You have AJ Storr and Chucky. I can't remember his last name, but number 23, the short guard. Pretty solid. Heckburn, I think is his last name. And then with Duke, Jared McCain, Jeremy Roach, you get the picture. Solid backcourt for both teams. Filipowski and then Crowell for Wisconsin. Also good front court matchup. I just think that Duke is way more talented than Wisconsin is. I think it's going to be a really close game, but Duke is going to barely pull it out. And John Shire kind of quiets the critics just a bit. Just a little bit. Next up, Kentucky and NC State. Interesting game. I think that as awesome as the story of NC State is, Kentucky's offense is just going to shell shock NC State. If you look at some of their games, they thrive, NC State does, thrive off getting an early lead and being somewhat comfortable with it. They kind of lose the lead, and then they have to fight back to win the game. But ultimately, they have. And that's even before the ACC tournament. Similar to the game that I mentioned earlier against Louisville, they led for most of it. U of L did fight back several times, but NC State was able to just barely stave them off. They can't do that against Kentucky. They're going to get blasted, I think. UK wins. Very interesting matchup here is Marquette and Florida. I think it's going to be a high-flying shootout. The question comes down to whether or not Clayton for Florida can make his shots, and if Florida can keep Oso Ighodaro off the backboard and Cam Jones away from the rim. In my opinion, I don't know if Florida can do either. Especially if Tyler Kolek is back and commanding the offense, I think Marquette should win this one. They're just better at Florida than they are better at Florida's game than Florida is, if that makes sense. It's just Marquette's a better team, arguably better coached, even though Shaka does choke in the tournament a lot. Their talent just beats them. They're not going to choke a 2-7 matchup again. So now we go down to the West region. North Carolina versus Michigan State. Michigan State is weird. It's a second round blue blood matchup. Should be fun. Michigan State has the talent and the defense to keep it close. You know, Michigan State's 12th in defense, even though North Carolina is 7th in defense. But the thing is, North Carolina is going to show Michigan State why they're a bubble team. The Big 12 typically underperforms in March Madness, even though there are a couple teams that do make runs to the Final Four and the championship, like Michigan State has in recent years. They're not one of those teams. North Carolina wins. I'm not going to say they're going to beat the shit out of them, but they'll win somewhat handily. Next up is St. Mary's and Charleston. Very interesting matchup because Charleston wants to run while St. Mary's wants to go at a tortoise speed. The tortoise speed's going to win. They're more efficient. Charleston has a god-awful defense, but St. Mary's is better at defense than they are offense, and Charleston's bread and butter is running up and down and scoring. St. Mary's will stifle that, and I think they beat them somewhat handily. And Randy Bennett makes a Sweet 16. Again. Clemson and Baylor. Clemson, even though they're not a great team, will show Baylor how overrated they are because Clemson has the horses, unlike toothpaste, to compete with Baylor on a court. PJ Hall will probably get whatever he wants on Baylor. And you have guys like Joe Girard who can outgun Ray J. Dennis on Baylor. I think it's a very interesting matchup. But I like Clemson in this one. Scott Drew, come to Louisville, please. We'd love to have you. Anyways, next up is Dayton and Arizona. Very interesting matchup. I think Arizona they're frauds, just like Baylor. Dayton has the ability to score in bunches, 21st in offense, 40% from 3. But Arizona will win this game if Caleb Love shows up and they hit their free throws because they're pretty bad from the line. But in the end, I think Dayton wins this one off of the three-point shooting, and Arizona does choke in the tournament again. And you have some questions about Tommy Lloyd. You know, it's kind of up in the air. Dayton has been a really good team all year. Arizona has been inconsistent, and I think their guards they can't hack it. Kylan Boswell's good. Not great. Caleb Love is super inconsistent. He was a hero a couple years ago in March. I don't think it's going to happen again. Next up, Purdue and TCU. As much as America and myself would love to see Purdue flame out again in the tournament, they're not going to. TCU is going to play Edie tough. Jamie Dixon plays good defense. TCU is 27th in defense. But Purdue's going to have a field day with their shooters. I mean, they shoot 41% from 3 to the team. Zach Edey's gravity to open up shooting is just immense. Fletcher Lawyer, Braden Smith, Lance Jones, Mason Gillis. They'll be snipers this game. I think they're going to outgun TCU. That's a valiant effort. But TCU, yet again, just can't get over the second round hump. Next up is a 12-13 matchup. McNeese versus Samford. Interesting game. It's really going to come down to who hits their threes. I mean, they're basically identical in three-point percentage. And based on how their seasons have gone, because this is a toss-up, I'm going to take McNeese. I don't feel great about it, but they're basically the same team. Will Wade's a good coach. They're a very athletic and talented team, relatively speaking. So that's my pick. Next up is Oregon and Creighton. Oregon's a fun story, and they're a solid team, but they just don't have the firepower to keep up with the Creighton team, especially in a shootout. Even if Creighton's not shooting well, they'll still just blast them. And the thing is, Kalkbrenner makes life difficult for every center that he goes up against. It'll be the same for, is it like Vontae, something like that for Oregon. He's a good big man, 21 for his last 21 from the field. That does not happen against Creighton. Creighton wins. Next up is Texas and Tennessee. And the only advantage Texas has over Tennessee is that they have better guards. Not a hot take in my opinion. And guards win you games in March. But the thing is, Tennessee's defense, which is third in the country, is just going to stifle that offense. They're not going to be able to drive because ADU is going to be in the paint, just smacking shit to the second row. It's going to be a lower scoring game than you'd expect based on their offensive numbers, but Tennessee should win handily. So now we move on to the Sweet 16. Have an awesome matchup here against with UConn and Auburn. And I really had to think about this one a lot. It's a really interesting matchup. I think of any team in the tournament, Auburn provides the toughest matchup for UConn. Auburn's fast, they're athletic, and they shoot well. You know, I mean, they're 14th in offense. No, UConn's 4th, but 14 is good enough to keep up with them. They shoot around the same in terms of three-point percentage and from the free throw line. Auburn plays faster. It really depends on the matchup between Donovan Clingan and Janai Broome. If Broome can at least somewhat negate Clingan from dominating the backboard and setting incredible screens, because Broome can guard ones and twos well enough. So to be a switch-all defense for Auburn, it can make UConn a bit uncomfortable. Guys like Cam Spencer that are a bit smaller can get beat up by Auburn's pressure. Auburn wins in a massive upset. Taking Auburn. Next up, Duquesne and Iowa State. I think Iowa State is an awful matchup for Duquesne because they're terrible. Duquesne is terrible on offense, but Iowa State is great on defense. Iowa State's good on offense. Duquesne is great on defense. So, bad matchup in that sense. They both play relatively slow, but Iowa State might not even give up 50 points to them. So, Iowa State wins. Next up, UNC and St. Mary's down here. I think it's a bit of an awkward matchup for North Carolina, who wants to run up and down, while St. Mary's they're one of the slowest teams in the country. The thing is, St. Mary's does not have the athletes to dictate the pace like they would against a team like Gonzaga. If North Carolina wants to run, they're going to run. There's nothing you can do about it. You just have to beat them at their own game, which St. Mary's can't do. North Carolina wins somewhat easily. So next up, we have a really cool matchup. Clemson and Dayton. But I will say this, just like the 2014 Dayton team, they're going to make it to the Elite Eight. Clemson's solid, but their defense it won't hold up. Dayton's going to have a field day shooting it. They're going to be riding the high from their Sweet 16 run. And they're going to make it to the Elite Eight. Shooting carries them over. Dayton for the win. Next, we have Purdue and McNeese. You know, the fairy tale ride for McNeese, it comes to a halt here. Zach Edey just abuses McNeese's defense, which is 84th in the country. And although McNeese can score from 3, Purdue's defense will hold them off well enough. McNeese should cover, but they're not going to win. Next, we have Creighton and Tennessee. I honestly think this is an awful, awful, awful matchup for Creighton. They rely a ton on their three-point shooting and for Kalkbrenner to dominate in the paint. Neither of those will happen. Tennessee is an amazing perimeter defensive team, and Adu just denies everything in the paint, which is Kalkbrenner's job. I think it's a good game, but Tennessee wins. And somewhat handily. They just keep them at bay. They keep Creighton arm's length the whole time, and it's just hard for them to win. Next is a really interesting game between Houston and Duke. And as overrated as I think Duke is, they have a really favorable matchup in this game and the previous 2 games. Houston, when they play a team that gets hot offensively, they can't keep up. Like, they have to play well defensively against good teams if they want to win. A lot of times, Houston, they're playing teams that just are kind of there. They let teams hang around too much. That's what they did last year, too. And when they played a team that could shoot the ball in Miami, they got the shit kicked out of them. Duke is a team that lives and dies by the 3. But the thing is, they have enough of a presence in the paint, whether that be through Filipowski or the guards driving, to negate Houston's perimeter defense. I think it's a really nip and tuck game. I got Duke. That's like the game I feel the least good about. But like when I watch Houston, I watched them a lot this year. I just don't know if they have it. They definitely do on defense, but usually it's like your offense isn't always going to be there, so you need to have a good defense to keep you in a game. Defense wins championships. But in Houston's case, sometimes their defense isn't there, but their offense never helps them in those cases. So they're kind of just like stuck in no man's land. I think that happens again here. Duke wins. So next up we have Kentucky and Marquette, and I think that this is probably going to be the best game of the tournament. Both teams are really similar in terms of style and explosiveness and roster construction. The difference is Marquette can actually play defense. But the thing is, I feel like UK, they'll do enough to make players like Tyler Kolek and Cam Jones uncomfortable. Stevie Mitchell, David Joplin, not great ball handlers. UK's speed and athleticism can really make Marquette uncomfortable and kind of shut down Iguodaro from being a factor. I think Kentucky wins this one. So it's going to be a really good game, but I think the matchup suits UK better than it does Marquette. Anyways, next up we have Dayton and North Carolina. So, North Carolina, similar to St. Mary's, the St. Mary's game is going to push the pace. Dayton likes to play efficiently and slowly, just like St. Mary's, albeit not as slow as St. Mary's, but pretty damn slow, 337th pace. I think even with their efficiency on offense, North Carolina's just too much. They got the dogs, they got the horses, they got the offense and the defense and the experience. They're better. That's what it comes down to. So next up we have Tennessee and Purdue in a rematch from the regular season. I think that Purdue does come out on top in this game. I think Mason Gillis, Purdue's sixth man, will do a solid enough job of guarding Dalton Knecht as one can do. He's going to get his no matter what. But if you can at least slow him down while also negating Santiago Vescovi and Zakai Ziegler from getting hot from three, you're playing with house money. And I feel like Fletcher Lawyer and Braden Smith can at least cancel those guys out. And Zach Edey's the difference. Even though Adu is a great center, it'll be a tough out. I think if they guard him straight up, Zach Edey, he'll feast. Purdue wins. So now we have the Final Four, I believe, right? Yeah. Final Four. Oh, shit, sorry. Auburn and Iowa State. I forgot to do that game. And Duke and Kentucky. Jeez. Auburn and Iowa State. Let's see. I think it's going to be a really evenly matched game between two efficient teams on both sides of the ball. Auburn, per usual, is going to want to play fast. Iowa State is going to be a bit more deliberate. But the difference in this game, I feel like, is Bruce Pearl. TJ Otzelberger is a good coach, but the farthest he's been in the tournament is the Sweet 16. Bruce Pearl has been around the block, coached at Tennessee for a long time, made the several weekend multiple times. Has a Final Four run at Auburn off a team that won the SEC championship. Very similar circumstances here. That Auburn team was a 5 seed, this one's a 4 seed. They're pretty similarly made up. I think it's a typical Bruce Pearl team. Iowa State's really good, but I think Auburn catches them lacking, and they win. Duke and Kentucky. It's going to be another classic in a row for Kentucky. I think both teams are really good with multiple pros, at least talent-wise. But ironically enough, John Calipari's coaching will be the reason Kentucky wins this game. John Shire, even though he's made it to the Elite Eight, his inexperience is going to be the death of Duke. He's going to panic when it's close, because it will be a close game. But Calipari's been there, done that, even if it hasn't been for a long time. UK is going to make a Final Four. So now the Final Four is Auburn versus North Carolina and Kentucky versus Purdue. If you remember, Auburn and North Carolina played in 2019 when Auburn did make the Final Four, but it was in the Sweet 16, 1 versus 5 matchup. This time it's a 1 versus 4 in the Final Four. So, we'll start with Auburn and North Carolina. I think this game's going to be an absolute shootout. Both teams are relatively the same in every major statistical category on offense. The difference is really going to come down to experience and talent. And although UNC only has Armando Bacot and RJ Davis with true Final Four experience, the rest of its roster has plenty of talented upperclassmen that have been around the block. And that's going to drag them to an extremely narrow victory. Auburn's going to play a tough game. I just like North Carolina's roster makeup for March better than Auburn's. Auburn has good guards, but they're inexperienced. They're young. Aiden Blackwell's a freshman. North Carolina's got RJ Davis, Harrison Ingram, Cormac Ryan, who should have a 401k already. You get it. They have experienced guys that have been there, done that. So I like North Carolina. Other matchup, Kentucky and Purdue. I feel like this one's really hard to predict. The styles contradict heavily. Purdue wants to play 4 out, 1 in. They want to play around Edey, have his gravity bring in a defense to leave shooters open. And it's really going to come down to Ugonna Onyenso versus Zach Edey in the paint. Can Onyenso guard him straight up? I don't know if he can, but if he can, it's a big if. They'll win the game because Kentucky's guards are far better than Purdue's. And even though Kentucky has a god-awful defense, which could catch up to them even earlier in this game, I think Kentucky wins, if I'm being honest. I think they win and go to the championship game. Now, the championship game is a blue blood matchup. 2 of the best teams in college basketball history. And it should be yet another classic. And I think that Kentucky may have finally met its match in multiple departments. North Carolina's guards can hang with them. North Carolina wants to play fast, just like Kentucky. Armando Bacot is a better big man than Onyenso, can negate his shot blocking. And North Carolina can slow down Kentucky's offense, but Kentucky cannot slow down North Carolina's offense. North Carolina wins. Gonna be a good game. Total points, we'll say 170. So we'll say like say 87 to 83. North Carolina. So that's it. Like I said, your sphere of contenders needs to come in this area. That's where the national champion will be. That does not mean that a team not in this area can't make a run. Obviously not, because I had Kentucky in my national championship game. It really comes down to matchups and who's hot and who's not. Both North Carolina and Kentucky, I feel like, are in good places, even though they didn't win their conference championships. They have really good offenses. North Carolina, 25-7 in offensive and defensive efficiency. That's good enough to win. I mean, you look at champions, and the average in offense is 8, but the average in defense is 10. So they're right around that range. You know, there are several teams that, well, Jesus Christ, now you're looking at them. All of them are actually really good on defense. But that's offense, sorry. A lot of them are pretty good on defense. Usually they're better on offense than they are on defense, but it's like, when you're looking at the top teams, you would have to pick like UConn, who, if I didn't pick North Carolina, I'd pick UConn to win the championship easily. Second option would be a team like Houston, but I just don't trust them enough. And I generally would pick UConn, but when I saw that Auburn matchup, I just don't like it for the Huskies. So that's my logic. I think North Carolina has the best draw, and they'll take advantage of it. So, yeah. If you enjoyed, please leave a like and subscribe. Comment your agreements, disagreements, what have you. Looking forward to the conversation. So, until next time, have a good one.